The knock comes after dark. Rahab knows the sound of official business. A sharp, deliberate knock, the kind that expects the door to open immediately. Two strangers arrived at her house earlier that evening, men whose accents and manner marked them as outsiders the moment she saw them. She does not know exactly who sent them, but she knows what the whole city knows. The Israelites are camped across the Jordan. The Jordan, which should be impassable at this season. The Jordan, which the stories say opened for them anyway. She makes her calculation quickly. She takes the men up to the roof and hides them under the stalks of flax she has spread in the heat to dry. And then she goes back down and opens the door. The king's men are looking for two foreign visitors seen coming to this house. She tells them yes, they were here. And she tells them they left just before the city gate closed. She suggests the soldiers move quickly toward the river fords if they want to catch them. The soldiers take her at her word. They go. The gate closes behind them. The men are still on the roof. This is Bible Stories Unearthed, where we retell the narratives of Scripture alongside the history, archaeology, and ancient world that give them their full weight. Today, the Canaanite woman who sheltered the spies of Joshua struck the most consequential bargain in the entire conquest narrative and found her name written centuries later in the genealogy of a king. The men on the roof are there because Jericho guards the door into Canaan. Drop down from the central highlands toward the Jordan River, and the land falls sharply, well below sea level, into one of the deepest and most arid inhabited valleys on earth. Here, fed by a perennial spring called Ain es Sultan, there has always been water. And where water flows in a desert, people follow. The great mound archaeologists call Tel es Sultan is not a natural hill. It is a compressed archive of human presence, one civilization's rubble becoming the foundation of the next across millennia. Jericho is among the oldest occupied sites on the planet. But it is important to understand what kind of place Jericho was, or was not, at the time this story is set. The Late Bronze Age world across Canaan was politically organized under Egyptian imperial reach. City-states paid tribute to Egypt, Egyptian administrative outposts were scattered through the landscape, and the Amarna letters, a diplomatic archive recovered from Egypt and dated to the 14th century BC, preserved direct correspondence between Egyptian pharaohs and Canaanite rulers, revealing a landscape of urban centers managing their own survival within a larger imperial framework. Jericho, however, does not appear in that correspondence. The archaeological picture of Tel es Sultan during the Late Bronze Age is one of minimal or severely reduced occupation. The site in this period does not appear to have participated in the network of fortified Canaanite city-states the Amarna archive reflects. Understanding that gap is central to everything that follows. Women in the broader Late Bronze Age world occupied a range of roles. Ugaritic texts from the Canaanite city of Ugarit, among the richest surviving literary sources for Bronze Age Canaanite culture, document women in merchant functions, craft production, and religious roles. But legal standing for women was almost always contingent on the kinship and household structures that surrounded them. A father's house, a husband's name, a brother's protection. Rahab's position in Jericho is notable precisely because she appears to exist largely outside those structures. She is not introduced as anyone's wife or daughter. And as the text carefully notes, her house is built into the wall itself, on the boundary between the city and everything outside it. The book of Joshua introduces Rahab without ceremony. Joshua, camped east of the Jordan at Shittim, sends 2 men ahead, scouts crossing into Canaanite territory alone, with orders to look over the land and specifically the city of Jericho. The text does not record their names, it records where they go, to the house of a woman named Rahab, described in the Hebrew as a zona, a prostitute. The text makes no attempt to soften this. No euphemism is offered, no qualifying distance. The word is precise, and that precision is part of what makes what follows so significant. Rahab is not introduced as a worthy figure whose true character is about to be revealed. She is introduced honestly, in terms that carried specific social weight in the ancient world. And then the narrative shows what she does with the position she occupies. Word reaches the king quickly. Israelite men have come into the city and were seen entering Rahab's house. He sends officers with the direct command, "Bring them out." Rahab, standing between royal authority and the men hidden on her rooftop, makes her choice. And she has already made it before the knock comes. She tells the officers the men were there, but left just before the gate closed. She sends them toward the Jordan fords. The soldiers go. The gate closes. The spies remain under the flax. What Rahab does next is where the story becomes something much larger than a spy narrative. She goes up to the roof before the men sleep, and what she says to them is not the improvisation of a frightened woman buying time. It is the considered speech of someone who has followed a line of reasoning to its end. She tells them what the whole city knows and what her king has apparently decided to deny. "I know that the Lord has given you this land. The whole country is melting in fear because of you. We have heard how your God dried up the Red Sea when you left Egypt. We have heard what you did to the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan. Every heart has failed. Every person's courage is gone." Then she says something that goes beyond any calculation of personal survival. "For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on the earth below." This is not a negotiating position. It is a confession. Rahab, a Canaanite woman in a city preparing to resist, has arrived on the basis of secondhand reports from outside any covenant community, without direct revelation or tradition, at a statement about the nature of God that the narrative records with complete seriousness. She does not hedge it. She does not qualify it as contingent on how the siege goes. She says it plainly, and then she asks for something in return. Her request is simple and specific, a sworn oath. When the city falls, not if, she says when, spare my family, my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, everyone gathered under my roof. The 2 men agree with conditions. Gather your family here and keep them inside when the assault comes. Tell no one what we have arranged, and bind this in the window through which you lower us, a cord of scarlet thread, so that when we enter the city, we know which house to honor the oath." She lowers the men from her window on a rope. They descend the outer face of the wall and slip away into the hill country. But Rahab has already told them what to do next. Do not go toward the river. The king's search party will scour the roads. Go into the hills and stay there. 3 days until the pursuit turns back. Only then make for the Jordan. The men do exactly as she instructs. 3 days in the hills while the soldiers sweep the fords and return empty-handed. Then the crossing. Then the report to Joshua. The whole land is in our hands. The people are already melting in fear. The moment the spies had descended and disappeared into the dark, Rahab had bound the scarlet cord in the window. The narrative moves forward through the Jordan crossing and the 7-day encirclement of Jericho. That strange, obedient, near-silent procession that transforms what should be a military siege into something much closer to a sacred act. Priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant. 7 ram's horn trumpets sounding continuously. The whole assembly walking in silence around the sealed city, once each day, returning to camp without a word spoken, for 6 days. The shofar carried deep cultic weight in the ancient Israelite world, associated throughout the Hebrew scriptures with divine presence, covenant assembly, and moments of theophany. The march of the priests bearing the ark is not incidental military spectacle. The text is not subtle about what it is saying. This battle is not Israel's to win by force. Their role is obedience. What happens to the walls is not their doing. On the 7th day, the assembly rises at dawn and circles the city 7 times. At the end of the 7th circuit, Joshua speaks. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The wall falls. The text is spare and absolute on this point. Every man went straight in. The city was taken. What follows is the execution of Hiram, the total devotion of the captured city to God. The text does not soften what this means. Every living thing within the walls is put to the sword. The concept of Hiram is not unique to the biblical text. A 9th century BC stone inscription found in what is now Jordan, the Mesha stele, carved by the Moabite king Mesha, uses structurally identical language. Cities taken, populations devoted to destruction, the national deity credited with the victory. The vocabulary of sacred warfare was documented across multiple cultures of the ancient Near East. That context does not diminish the biblical account. It places it in a recognizable and documented world. But the harem carries one exception. Joshua calls the 2 spies forward. Their instructions are direct. Go to Rahab's house. Bring out the woman and everyone who belongs to her, exactly as you swore. They go in. They bring out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and everyone gathered under the promise of the scarlet cord. Every person survives intact while the city burns to rubble around them. They are placed outside the camp of Israel while the destruction runs its course. And then the text adds a single line that carries the full weight of what has happened. She has lived among Israel to this day, not outside it, not at its margin, within it. Rahab's story does not end in Joshua. The New Testament returns to her 3 separate times, and its treatment of her is consistent. She is not rehabilitated or reframed. She is named as she was named in Joshua. The letter to the Hebrews includes her in its catalog of faith. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had welcomed the spies. The letter of James invokes her alongside Abraham as the twin illustration of faith made visible through action. Was not Rahab the prostitute also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way? And the genealogy at the opening of Matthew's Gospel tracing the ancestral line from Abraham to Jesus of Nazareth, deliberately structured with 4 women named across its entire length, contains this. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. A Canaanite woman who sheltered enemy spies in a city days from destruction is listed among the direct ancestors of King David. The cord in the window of a house built into a wall that no longer exists threads forward across 1,000 years of narrative. The Hebrew word zona is translated as prostitute across the major textual and scholarly traditions without substantive dispute. An alternative reading, that the word might mean innkeeper, based on comparison with an Akkadian term for a tavern keeper, has been proposed occasionally and taken up in some popular discussion. It has not entered the mainstream of Hebrew lexicography. The word zona appears throughout the Hebrew scriptures in contexts that confirm its standard meaning, and the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, produced in the 3rd to 2nd centuries BC, renders it consistently as porne, without ambiguity. Phyllis Bird, among the scholars who have examined the term most carefully in its social context, has argued that the usage is both precise and deliberate. The later rabbinic tradition that reframes Rahab as an innkeeper appears to be an honorific revision rather than a textual correction. The mainstream reading stands. The architectural detail, that Rahab's house was built into the city wall, has parallels in ancient Near Eastern construction practice. Casemate wall systems in which enclosed rooms are incorporated within a wall's thickness are attested at various sites across the ancient Near East, including in the Middle Bronze Age Levant. The detail in the text is architecturally coherent as a description of lower status occupation in a wall system, even if confirming the specific construction type at Jericho and the relevant period is not possible given the site's condition, and that condition matters. The mainstream archaeological consensus, shaped substantially by Kathleen Kenyon's stratigraphic work at Tel es-Sultan in the 1950s, is that Jericho shows little to no evidence of significant fortified occupation during the Late Bronze Age, the period most commonly associated with the conquest narrative. This is the prevailing scholarly position, and it has not changed substantially since Kenyon's excavations. A later reassessment by Bryant Wood in 1990 challenged aspects of Kenyon's pottery analysis and argued for a destruction closer to 1400 BC, but that interpretation has not been accepted into the mainstream of Syro-Palestinian archaeology. Erosion of the mound's uppermost layers is a genuine and documented factor that scholars acknowledge. Kenyon herself noted it, but the mainstream view does not treat it as sufficient to place the absence of Late Bronze Age fortifications in doubt. The consensus finding is an absence, not a gap awaiting resolution. Matthew's genealogy raises a related question worth stating plainly. Whether the conquest is dated to the 15th or 13th century BC, the generational span between Rahab and David is considerably compressed in Matthew's account. The mainstream of New Testament scholarship reads Matthew's genealogy as a structured literary and theological document rather than a strict biological record. Its 3 groups of 14 names follow a deliberate pattern widely recognized as purposeful organization. This is how its original audience would have understood it. Rahab makes her decision in the dark, on a rooftop, without a covenant, without revelation, without community or tradition behind her. She has secondhand reports, accounts heard at a distance about events she did not witness, and she follows them to a conclusion and acts on it, alone, while her city's king sends soldiers to undo what she has already done. She is not remembered in Hebrews and James because she was persuaded over time or came to faith gradually. She is remembered because she decided. And then she tied a cord in the window and held her position while the world around her sealed its gates and prepared to fight. What the text refuses to do with Rahab is smooth her out. It does not explain away who she was before the spies arrived. Does not require her to be more respectable to be remarkable. She is introduced as she was. What she does next is the point. And when the genealogy is written, her name is not footnoted, it is placed in the line. That refusal to revise her leaves a question open that the story never quite answers. What does it mean that the act of faith, on which the conquest turned, was found in a woman the city had placed at its wall? Thank you for being here. This story has been told. Subscribe and return to Bible Stories Unearthed. The book is open. Let's unearth more.